All right, we're starting the afternoon session. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here, and I wanted to thank Paul and the Lens Media Lab for inviting me to be part of this wonderful symposium where I'm learning a lot. So this first session, we are going to hear from colleagues that have that have worked with Paul and Lens Media Lab to extract some findings from their collection in relation to the database. So the first speaker will be Katie Sanderson and Nora Kennedy. Katie is a conservator of photograph at in the Department of Photograph Conservation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And she works with Nora, who is the Sherman Fairchild conservator in charge of the Department of Photograph Conservation at the Met. Please come up here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Katie and I are absolutely thrilled to be here today for this celebration of the many achievements of the Lens Media Lab here at Yale. And as Sylvie was mentioning, in this next series of talks, we'll see how the LML paper collection, and importantly, how some of the apps the LML has created have a positive impact on various areas of research over the years. Our talk is focused on a collaborative project that is looking at the work of one artist, Man Ray, and gathering data from a number of collections, both public and private. This project originated in relation to an upcoming Metropolitan Museum exhibition, Man Ray, When Objects Dream, that will open in September 2025, so just about a year from now. The exhibition is curated by Stephen Pinson and Stephanie D'Alessandro, who are respectively from the Department of Photographs and the Department of Modern Contemporary Art at the Met, and will focus on Man Ray's cross-media experimentation from the 19-teens to the 1920s through the lens of one of his most significant contributions, the Rayograph. Although he focused on painting in his early years living in New York, he picked up a camera for the first time around 1915 and used it to document his own work as well as, eventually, other artists' work and their art collections. After moving to Paris in 1921, Man Ray became well known for his photographic portrait of artists and the intellectual elite. His famous Rayographs, which are also known as photograms or cameraless photographs, were the supposed result of a happy accident around the winter of 1921 or 22. Once discovered, he experimented with the infinite effects of arranging objects on photographic paper and exposing them to light before developing them like traditional gelatin silver photographs.
The upcoming exhibition intends to recenter Man Ray's Rayographs in his larger body of work by drawing through lines between his earlier work in New York in the 19-teens and his work in Paris in the 1920s, which is primarily when he was making his Rayographs. As early as 1908, when Man Ray was just 18 years old, he drew studies modeling the shadows cast on the walls of different shapes and at different angles, which is an interesting foreshadowing moment, I think. And in the years following, he turned to painting, but continued to experiment with less orthodox approaches to composing his images, and eventually turned to making what he called aerographs, which I keep calling sprayographs, because rayographs and sprayographs, but they're aerographs. And he would make these by spray painting through and around stencils and objects. So again, an interesting sort of precursor to the idea of using light to create these images instead. And Man Ray described this method as painting in 3D, and remarked that to obtain the desired effects, you had to move the airbrush nearer or farther from the canvas. And talking about his aerographs, he also declared, "I was more interested in the idea I wanted to communicate than in the aesthetics of the picture. And here was a way to express my ideas more rapidly than by a painting." And Man Ray was drawn in particular to the spontaneity as well as the finality of these compositions, and must have been pleased when he realized he could accomplish similar effects with the photographic materials he was already using. And by 1922, he proclaimed that he had freed himself from the sticky medium of paint and was working directly with light itself.
So at first glance, these rayographs may seem simple to understand, but looking at this composition, questions arise about how he actually made it. For example, why are the central shapes black instead of white? If you were to lay a comb on a piece of photographic paper, it would be white with a black background. Looking at Man Ray's rayographs with Stephen and Stephanie, we developed a long list of questions about how he achieved the various effects in these images. So the natural place to start was the darkroom, and we have a darkroom in photograph conservation at the Met. And here we began to test out some of our theories with objects similar to the ones we could identify in the rayographs. Eggs and light bulbs seemed like a good starting point. They're readily available, and they appear as, again, these recognizable shapes in Man Ray's photographs. When flashed from above with one single exposure, they remain recognizable. But when flashed on an angle, the quail and chicken eggs become these extended blobs, and the light bulbs become unrecognizable, though are relatable to shapes in Man Ray's work. And I know this isn't a one-to-one imitation, but it does give a clue to the potential identity of this amorphous shape in Man Ray's work.
And in another example, this simple square prism is a shape we observed in several of his photographs. And here you just see it set on a piece of printing paper in a mock-up in the darkroom with a light source coming from the bottom right corner. In the resulting test print, with direct overhead lighting, the result is just a simple white square rendered by the shadows cast by the prism. With similar lighting to the mock-up in the bottom right corner, we get a gratifyingly similar result to the test. Of course, the values are reversed in the final print, but those amazing radiating lines are very much present. And using multiple exposures introduces additional complexity, which can make it increasingly difficult to identify a given object or the technique used in exposing the object. And in accounts of Man Ray's working, a variety of suggestions are made over time, including the use of sunlight with its parallel rays, the use of multiple exposures, but also even of a light moving during the exposure. And this led to questions about the type of light or lights he may have been using, and whether he may have used a less sensitive photographic paper that would have accommodated these longer exposure times, something like a gaslight paper, for example. And just to share some examples, the shadows and reflections cast by our prism aren't dissimilar to shapes seen in some of the prints that we've pictured on the right from the Getty and MoMA collections, and some even with the outward radiating lines that we can see.
With questions of photographic paper types in mind, we teamed up with Paul and the Lens Media Lab, taking measurements first on the Met's rayographs. And excuse me, here you can also see Tess Hamilton, who will be speaking shortly, who brought the LML instruments to the Met that she had on loan for her work at the Guggenheim. Now, these are the institutions who generously allowed us to take measurements on a selection of rayographs in their collections. And the Lens Media Lab, in turn, generously added data that they had gathered previously from private collections. As with any data set, there's a strength in numbers. The more data that you can aggregate, the more robust and reliable your results will be. We've been talking about this today. So we then decided to broaden the scope to include non-rayograph photographs by Man Ray. And ultimately, data was gathered on 55 rayographs, 63 other Man Ray photographs from 4 institutions and 3 private collections. Just as a reminder, this is like a quiz. When we talk about collecting data, we're referring to all the numerical values representing color, thickness, gloss, and texture, which then, ingested by LML staff into the app, represent the values of warm, thick, matte, and rough, resulting in the glyphs that are now so familiar to us all and into the so-called expressiveness of each photographic paper. And this is where the importance of the Lens Media Lab becomes very, very clear, both for their paper sample collection and for their data processing and visualization ability. You end up with all this data, all these numbers, and the question is, what do you do with it? And the Rayograph app provides the answer. The app offers an overview of all the Man Ray papers we measured relative to one another. You can see there's this main grouping over here, and then there are a few satellites out to the sides. And it's easy to think at this stage, well, what does this mean? How close or far are these in relation to each other and in relation to photographic papers historically? This is going to look familiar to you, so we got the answer from LML's ability to show where Man Ray sits in relation to the entirety of the paper sample collection. So this is the universe of all LML paper samples in Paperbase, which you all have access to. And here are the Man Ray papers we measured within that universe. And I'll toggle back and forth a bit. And we can draw one conclusion already, which is that most Man Ray papers fall into one galaxy within this larger universe, which is at the lower right. There are few up to the left, but most of them fall to the lower right. Back in the Man Ray app, and zooming in a little bit, we can give you just a brief tour of some of the app's capabilities. And as you saw from Damon's talk, there are many things that we are not showing you, but believe me, a lot of the features that he showed this morning are also possible with this app. So here you see that each print is represented in the space by a thumbnail image. You can also switch this toggle that gives you the relative sizes of every print, which is a cool feature. If we zoom in again, you'll note that there are these letters and numbers next to each image. So next to Picasso, for example, there's me and 33, which means the Met, and that print is from 1933. Or we can turn to a view of the glyphs, here with different colors representing each collection in the data set. Or we can look at images of the surface texture of each of the photographs.
We can also look at the data set organized by date, thickness, warmth, roughness, and gloss, and this should start to look a little bit familiar, I think, too. In this view, all of the prints are organized by date, and you can see that this group represents the earlier portion of Man Ray's career, partly because that's what we were most focused on, the period of time when he was making rayographs, primarily in the 1920s. And if we filter out all the non-rayograph photographs in this group, so just the remaining prints here are his rayographs, we've got the same view here with that filter, and the bulk of the rayographs fit into that period between 1922 and 1928. I'm realizing how tiny the dates are on the screen. Take my word for it. We've got 1922 right here, and then this is, oops, not Nora, 1928 up there. And if we organize by roughness, we can see that also most of the prints are on the smoother side, with a smaller group showing a little bit more texture on the right. Both in terms of warmth and thickness, they all sort of form a bell curve as well, with, they're falling pretty squarely in the middle The bulk of the materials are really quite similar on those two metrics. And then I think it's most notable that most of the prints are actually quite matte, with just a few outliers off to the right there. And these two particularly glossy ones off to the right are later prints into the 1960s. And the glossiest prints, so the glossiest prints are on the right, and if we, again, filter out the non-rayographs, we can also see that it's the rayographs that really do reside in this quite matte territory as well. So hard to say definitively that he was purposely choosing matte papers just because he was making rayographs. It could also have to do with the date range, but an interesting finding nonetheless.
We've been looking at groupings of photographs, but now let's just look at one photograph, and we'll use Kiki drinking as our example. If you click on a thumbnail on the app, this image appears, and it includes some basic tombstone information, as well as the values for thickness, gloss, warmth, and roughness. Finally, at the bottom here, you can see also reference papers, and if you open that up, you will see all of the papers from the LML collections that the measurements of this photograph are a match for. So with Kiki, we get 50 reference papers. It's quite a lot. And, it's a bit overwhelming. And I know you can't see these individual entries very well. That's okay. I'm using them to make the point that one can take these computer-generated results and add to them some human refinement. So if I remove all the postcards, for example, from the list, as Kiki drinking is definitely not a postcard, we can knock the resulting references back to 44, and you see those white gaps appearing on the screen. And if we're confident in that 1922 date for this print, then we can knock the list back further by removing any papers post-1922. So this leaves us with a more digestible, if not insignificant, but still a much more digestible result of 16 reference paper. Now, with regard to the dates of the papers, colleagues at LML have pointed out that though their collection includes about 7,000 paper samples, it is, of course, not exhaustive. Oops. Excuse me. We should also consider that some manufacturers would produce a paper and it would have the same characteristics over a number of years. So, one has to, I sort of blithely cut those out, but one has to still consider them in any case. And again, the depths to which one can go with this data are significant, and we really only are touching the surface. Now, in addition to the above information, one can also access the individual glyph and the surface texture image for each photograph. And one can also choose a couple of photographs to compare. So here we're choosing Kiki again and comparing it with the untitled banjo image. And we can compare those surface textures, which, being a very visual person, I find that much more compelling. And this brings us back to the notion that looking is important. Here are my Met colleagues with Alison Rossiter looking over papers, paper packages, and sales catalogs. From the data we've collected thus far, it looks like Man Ray did not have strong aesthetic preference for his rayographs versus other photographic work. Thinking about what we've learned and what questions remain, it may be most appropriate to return to Man Ray's own words. I was more interested in the idea I wanted to communicate than the aesthetics of the picture.
Maybe we should listen to artists more. We hope this very brief introduction to the Lens Media Lab Rayograph app and its use of the LML collection has given a sense of what a powerful tool it can be. We're very eager to continue sort of diving into the depths a little bit further as well. And It's a means to aggregate data from a number of different collections, which in this particular case I think has been particularly powerful. And we extend our thanks again to the Yale University Art Gallery, the J. Paul Getty Museum, and the Museum of Modern Art for their important collaboration, and for making the interpretation of that data accessible online to all the participants of the project. You have also gotten, I hope, a sense that, any such tool becomes more powerful the more data that's added to it. And it's really only through an app like this that a sense can be made, I think, of the many numbers generated by the measurements that we make. All of the findings here are jumping off points for further research into various aspects of Man Ray's work. And as in all research, we obtain the best results from combining avenues of investigation. So we do indeed need to comb through the collected data assembled and make comparable via the app. But we really benefit from studying paper collections, whether at LML or with Alison Rossiter, or all the many other paper collections that are starting to emerge. And of course, we can't neglect the direct study of the artworks themselves, alone and in comparison with others, and always paired with historical and art historical research. Admittedly, many mysteries remain, and from what I've read about Man Ray, that would probably make him pretty happy. As conservators, there's apparently no length to which we will not go. Kiki drinking remains a particular obsession, to the point where younger staff members volunteer to lie prone on the darkroom floor, awkwardly balancing various objects, only to achieve, as yet, imperfect results. It's good to have challenges. We have many to thank for this opportunity to collaborate on this project. Working with the outstanding Lens Media group is a great benefit to a museum like ours, without similar resources in terms of the expertise provided by Paul, Cappy, Cynthia, Damon, and others. Our thanks to the many individuals listed here for their generous collaboration, and thanks to all of you for being here today.